A child puts a tooth under a pillow. Some hours later, a hand slides in, takes the tooth, leaves a coin, and gets out again without waking anybody. You have either done this or it was done to you. Tonight, in Madrid, a child will do exactly the same thing, and the tooth will not be collected by a fairy. It will be collected by a mouse, one who lives in a biscuit tin, in a cellar under a sweet shop, at an address the city has marked with a plaque. That mouse has an author, a priest, given the job by a queen. But start where everybody starts. The tooth fairy feels old, older than your parents, older than theirs, one of those things that has simply always been done, like throwing spilled salt over your shoulder. She is small, she has wings, she trades coins for teeth. And nobody remembers being told about her, because being told about her happens before memory starts. That is part of why she feels ancient. She is the only magic most of us believed in, and then performed ourselves. You were the child with the tooth, and then one night you were the hand under the pillow. And it points at an older world, one where a coin was a real decision, and a child's tooth was somehow worth one anyway. Here is where that comes apart. Go looking for the tooth fairy in the written record, and she is not there. Not in medieval England, not in the great Victorian collections of country custom, made by men who wrote down everything a villager would tell them. The earliest trace anybody has found is a newspaper, the Chicago Sunday Tribune, in 1908, on the Practical Housekeeper's page, where readers wrote in to each other about stains and bedtimes. A reader called Lillian Brown sent in a tip for getting a loose tooth out of a child who would not sit still. Tell him about the tooth fairy. Put it under the pillow, and she will leave something in its place. That is her first known appearance in print. It is not proof she was invented that week. A custom passed between parents leaves no paper behind it. But it is where the trail starts. Rosemary Wells taught at a dental school in Illinois, and she went looking properly. Years of newspaper archives and letters and household papers, chasing a creature nobody had ever thought to write down. She put the emergence at about the turn of that century too, which makes the tooth fairy younger than the aeroplane. And it raises a better question than the one we started with. If she is that new, what was everybody else using? A mouse. In France, in Belgium, in Switzerland, in Morocco, and right across the Spanish-speaking world, the tooth is taken by a small mouse. Hundreds of millions of children, and not a wing among them. And Spain's mouse is the one we can put a date on, because Spain's mouse was commissioned. In 1894, the Queen Regent of Spain sent for a priest called Luis Coloma. Her son had lost a baby tooth. He was 8 years old, and he had been King of Spain since the day he was born, because his father died before he arrived. Her choice was an odd one. Coloma was a Jesuit who had taken a doctorate in law, then abandoned it the same year to enter the order. And 4 years before the palace wrote to him, he had published a novel. It took the Spanish aristocracy apart, their debts, their affairs, their vanity, drawn closely enough that Madrid spent a season deciding who was who. Then the palace asked him for this. Not a history, not a sermon. A bedtime story for one child about a lost tooth. It is the smallest job you could hand the most talked-about writer in Spain. And he did not write a soft one. In Coloma's tale, the mouse has a name, Pérez. He has a home, and the home is exact. A Huntley and Palmer's biscuit tin, lying on its side in a cellar behind the stacked cheeses, underneath a confectioner's shop in the middle of Madrid. Pérez moves around the city through its pipes. He dodges the cats. He collects the teeth, and he leaves something behind for every one. And in the story, He comes for the kings. But the boy does not stay in the palace. Perez turns him into a mouse, and the two of them go out into the city together. Because there is another tooth to collect, from another child, and Perez has work to do. They are way in an attic. The roof slopes down until it meets the floor, and there are gaps in it. The cold of the dawn comes through, and there are icicles hanging on the inside. A bread basket hangs on the wall with nothing in it. A boy called Giles is asleep underneath, on straw and rags. He is the child whose tooth they have come for. And the 8-year-old King of Spain looks at that room and cries. Because he did not know it was there. Nobody had ever shown him that this existed in the country he had been ruling since he was a baby. The bed he woke in that morning stands in a room with tall shutters and heavy drapes, big enough to lose a child in. This one has straw in it and a hole in the roof. They are in the same city, a few streets apart. The gold coin goes to Giles. That is what the priest did with the commission. He was asked to settle one child at one bedtime over one lost tooth, the smallest audience a writer is ever given. And he spent it on the other boy. So why does the English-speaking world have a fairy instead? Because the fairy had better luck with publishers. After that newspaper column, she starts turning up in print properly. First, a 3-act playlet written for children to perform at school. Then, 2 decades on, the first real children's story about her. Then books, then films, then a small industry of little pillows with pockets sewn into them. And notice what all of that has in common with the mouse. A byline, a date, a publisher. Now, I am not going to overstate this. The tooth mouse is older than Coloma. 2 centuries before him, a French writer had already turned a fairy into a mouse and sent her under a king's pillow after his teeth. Coloma did not invent the idea. What he did was give Spain a particular mouse, a name, a job, and an address. Go to Madrid, walk up Calle Arenal, and at number 8, above head height, you will find a small plaque. It marks the house of a mouse. It is where Coloma put him. The city council marked the spot, the way a city marks the birthplace of a composer, an official plaque on a real building for somebody who never existed. There is a museum behind it. It is very small, and it is always full of children. So the thing we hand our children as timeless folklore turns out not to be timeless at all. It has bylines and dates. It was written by people we can name, one of them a Jesuit with a grudge against the rich, who took a boy king to a cold attic and made sure the gold went to the other child. And tonight, a hand goes under a pillow and swaps a tooth for a coin. That is not an ancient rite. That is a story somebody wrote, and it worked so well we forgot it had an author. Coloma kept writing and was eventually elected to the Royal Spanish Academy. In Spain, he is remembered for the novel that made him enemies. Everywhere else, he is remembered without his name attached, every time a child puts a tooth under a pillow and waits for the mouse. So, what came for your teeth? A fairy, a mouse, or something stranger? Tell me in the comments and say where you grew up. I read them. A like helps more than you would think, and subscribing means the next one finds you. Thank you for watching. See you next time.